Hello, everyone, and welcome to my fake podcast, which is a podcast that's not really a podcast, but I have podcast equipment. Therefore, I pretend like I have one, and I invite some of my favorite people on to talk about things I really care about. This is my friend, my dearest friend, Isla Morley. Welcome to my fake podcast.
It's nice to be here.
So, Isla is my friend, and one day I really do want to share the story of how we met because I think it's a little serendipitous and cute, and I really treasure our meet cute. And today, we're going to talk about her book called The Last Blue by Isla Morley. This is a novel, historical fiction. Is that right? And this is her third novel. And the reason we're talking about it is because I love it and I'm a huge fan and I want as many people to read this as possible. And you might have clicked on this video because of the title, Who Were the Blue People of Kentucky? This is an actual thing, an actual part of history. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Isla? Who were the blue people of Kentucky?
Well, the first thing is that they are really, really blue.
Right. Their skin
is blue, and although there are no blue people that we know of any longer, about 200 years ago that we have some kind of historical account of this man called Martin Fugit. He was a French orphan. He was a stowaway, came over to the United States, and he eventually settled in kind of a really remote area of the Appalachia on the banks of Troublesome Creek. And although the genealogies don't show that he was blue, there are some anecdotes that say he was blue, but regardless, he ended up kind of astronomical odds finding a woman that he loved and end up marrying, and come to find out that she had this recessive gene that when they started having children, about half of the children came out blue. So when we say blue, we want to think like, are they bluish? When
right, like maybe silvery or something,
or ashy, but no, they were blue in some cases, as blue as a bruised plum.
Oh, blue as a bruised plum. And that's not easy to say, for one thing. Yeah, that's, and like blue. And I love the cover of the book, by the way, because I feel like you get that feeling of the blueness in the font as well as in the image of the girl. But you think the skin is more green blue like this, or?
No, they're not as light as that blue. They're a kind of vivid blue all over, and then you'd have more pronounced blue areas in their lips. Apparently, when there were a lot of emotions going on, like if they were angry, their fingernails would turn a really dark shade of blue. Their lips would be blue. So, and the cover, what we wanted to evoke was not the giveaway of the blue skin, which is so obvious. But as you'll see, it evokes where these people lived. There's this really remote kind of wilderness area of then a largely unexplored Appalachian area. So it speaks to the mountains and kind of a hidden sense. And of course, that brings us to the other point about the blue people, is that nobody knew about them. Even when I came across the story, I thought for sure there's been a book written or there's a movie, but no, there was nothing. It's like the best kept secret of these really unique people. And that is to a large extent because they were hidden.
Right. And hidden almost in the trees, as if,
in the trees, yeah.
Hidden and they were hiding themselves because of the discrimination.
Well, I don't know that they were necessarily hiding themselves, and we don't have a lot of information about how they lived, which is part of why I wanted to explore this in this novel. Really what we have is this document that's about 4 pages. It was an article written by a woman called Kathy Trost for a now defunct Science magazine, and it was published in the early 80s. And she just referenced a few people that were blue and these encounters where people try to make contact. But I was thinking about other examples that we know of, that when people are born different, they are forced to hide and they're almost quarantined. If you think of leper colonies, people are isolated oftentimes against their will, because there are all these superstitions that grow up, and people are worried that if we have people who are different among us, then that's going to be bad for us. Something's going to happen to us. Somehow our children are going to get this. It's a catching thing. Or in the story, I imagine all kinds of atrocities that happen to these people. And it's not hard to imagine that, because you know of other examples where that's happened.
I mean, not just today, but in the 30s, right? This takes place in the 30s and in the Deep South, right? So it's really compounded in terms of discrimination and what these people had to go up against, especially the characters in your book. So then let's ask then, why were they blue? Can you explain this for us? What was the condition called?
So a lot of this I don't want to spell out.
Sure, yeah,
because
it's part
you want
of the
to read
story.
about it, because it's such an intriguing thing.
Yes.
The condition is called metemoglobinemia.
Metemoglobinemia. Just say that 5 times.
Metemoglobinemia.
Yes.
It's a real tongue twister.
Yes.
But if you're going to med school and you're doing your hematology course, you are going to be one of the few people that has to learn about these people.
Yep.
Because it is a condition that was finally diagnosed in the 60s by a pretty famous hematologist. He worked at the University of Kentucky, and actually he was famous because he helped isolate an antidote for cholera. But he'd been hearing rumors that there were blue people in this remote area of eastern Kentucky, and had discounted them. There was a nurse that was living there, and she had this rural medical clinic. And one day somebody came to her clinic who was blue, and she thought that they were going to die on the spot. Mm-hmm. And when it was, you know, not a life-threatening illness that they were coming for, and certainly not to be treated for their blue skin, she sent word to some of these bigger medical centers in the big cities of Kentucky asking for help, and nobody believed her. So finally, a hematologist was persuaded to come down, and there's this great account of him and the nurse kind of tromping through the hills of Appalachia, trying to look for blue people, and they'd spot somebody up on a hill, and then they'd go up after them. And then they'd reach them, and that person would have disappeared. And this guy had to drive 8 hours. In those days, the roads were problematic. So you'd have to drive 8 hours from Kentucky to from Lexington to try and access that area. And they just were not successful. Nobody would talk to them about it. And eventually he found somebody who came into a clinic he had given up. And it was this brother and sister. They walked in, and they kind of wanted to, they wouldn't go into the clinic. They were hiding in the shadows of the hallway. And he's quoted as saying, you know, what he saw on their faces was this incredible amount of pain, that they were somehow feeling ashamed of being blue.
Right.
But it was really because of their bravery that he was able to start asking questions about the extended family and their ancestors, and then, you know, got introduced to other people who were blue,
right,
and finally pieced together some kind of idea of what could be afflicting these people.
Right.
And then it required blood samples and so forth. And so through his work, he's eventually able to diagnose them. But they are not the first blue people that were ever recorded. In fact, there was another hematologist at the turn of the previous century who had written about a group of blue Alaskan Eskimos.
Oh.
And so this Lexington hematologist was able to go back into the medical journals and spot some similarities, and then he took it from there in trying to see if there was any kind of treatment for the blue people.
And when you explain all this, it really is amazing that no one has fictionalized a sort of a history of this or any characters or stories. And that's why I'm so excited about the book, because it's really one of a kind. And I kept texting you as I was reading it, like, I've never read anything like this book. And the fact that it's based in history and based on this, the history of the journalism, which we will go into, as well as the condition, is just so fascinating. Which that brings me to the one of the main characters in the book is a journalist, and he is probably considered the main character, right? And his friend is the photographer, and so they are going into Appalachia, and this is at the time at the rise of color film. And can you talk about why this was so important at this time, especially with this story?
Well, these two documentarians are working for the government, for the Works Progress Administration. And basically they're artists that are on the government subsidy. And there were all kinds of teams of journalists like that were going all over the country in the 1930s to kind of depict the trials of Americans in different regions. So some of them were going to the Dust Bowl area. Some of them were going along the California migration route. So we have Dorothea Lange's beautiful black and white photograph called Migrant Mother. And so some of these field journalists were going into Eastern Kentucky and those kinds of areas, and nobody knew much about that area in general. So a lot of myth and lore had grown up in ensuing years. So at the same time, Agfa and Kodak had just developed the first color film. That was in 1935 when it was first invented. And so it just started creeping into some of these field photographers' work. So the kind of the dilemma was nobody would believe that there would be blue people, that existed. This was also the time where kind of those freak shows were, kind of at the height of that. Also, there were a lot of hoaxes that are associated with that.
Yes.
So it had to be set at that particular time because I wanted to explore the dilemma that this photographer is going to have.
Would you be able to just introduce the character of Jubilee for the audience, just in a couple minutes? Because she's so beautiful to me, and when you read characters in books and you want to meet them in real life, she's one of those characters for me. Who is she?
Jubilee Buford is this young woman who's been kept in isolation her whole life. She's kind of the last of the blue families. A lot of the blue people had already been driven out of that area. And so it's her and her brother that are the last of the two blues. And so she's lived near a town, but she's never had any interactions with those people that weren't cruel.
Yeah.
But she's got this wonderful spirit. She's a person that is at home in nature. So as you read the story, you'll learn that she has these wonderful attributes, that she has this really gentle nature. She, for example, she takes care of birds. She has an aviary, and she's when she encounters injured animals, she has a knack for healing them.
But she's also fierce because she knows where the snakes are, and she runs around barefoot, and she's wild and beautiful and what we're going to talk about in this next conversation that we're going to have is the love between Jubilee and the other character.
And I think one of the things we'll see about Jubilee is how she changes over the course of this story.
Yeah.
In the beginning, she is independent to a certain extent, and you see her, she's very sure-footed. She knows her way around these hollows where nobody has ever gone before. For her, she knows exactly where to step. She knows where all the traps are laid. But she she will have to explore her true identity, because for so long her identity has been about her blueness, and her agency in the world has been so confined and determined by the world at large, by the community near her. So she's going to have to kind of break through those boundaries, break through her blue skin, and break through all this, the fear and discrimination that she's had to live with and kind of hidden from. And the only way she's going to do that is through love.
Yeah, and connection. Yeah, through someone that she fears at first. There's so many things I want to talk about in the book regarding that, but I will have to wait till we're off mic because I don't want to spoil anything. Before we wrap up this very mini episode of My Fake Podcast, is there anything else that you want to add that you maybe read about in your research about the Blue people?
So one of the things in Kathy Trost's article that really inspired me, that I held in my mind the whole time that I was writing this love story, was about a journalist who managed to have an interview with a family member of the Fugits. And this was round about in the 1980s. And he was an older man, and he still lived in this little one-room cabin, this log cabin. And this journalist had been told that this man's deceased wife, her name was Luna, and she was bluer than any of the blues. And when the journalist, the man acknowledged that he was part of the families that had lived in that area, and he had acknowledged that, yes, there were blues among them. And when he was asked then about his own wife, about the fact that she had been blue, he just looked out the window and refused the question. He wouldn't acknowledge that she was blue when he pressed him. And so that made me think, okay, first of all, I thought, wow, when they say love is blind, and I thought love is colorblind. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to explore how that would work, and also what were the other reasons that man had that made him not want to admit that his wife, who was buried just a stone's throw from his log cabin, that she was blue.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you really have to read the story to find out, because now that you're saying that, I could see how that is humming throughout the entire book. I'm just going to ask my audience to pre-order The Last Blue by Isla Morley. You can click the link below to pre-order if you want to support independent publishers and don't want to, I don't know, but some people don't like buying through Amazon. So we have a link below for you. You can also go on Goodreads if you want to take part and give a review and see what other people are saying about the book. Just to let you know, I know I have a lot of really wonderful people in my audience who always ask, how can we support you, or how can we support authors, because we are all book lovers. Pre-ordering a book during the time of its release is the number one thing you could do to support an author. So pre-order The Last Blue, and then we will see you guys for our next episode of this little mini-series I've created called The Last Blue Fake Podcast. Okay, bye.
Look here, look at you. You're on camera.